Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is produced by the Child Abuse Prevention Council of Contra Costa County, Contra Costa County Employment and Human Services, and the Child Abuse Training and Technical Assistance Center, a project of the Center for Innovation and Resources. For those of you who can hear me, this might seem obvious, but I just want to remind everyone to turn on their speakers in order to hear the presentation. You can use the Q&A feature to ask the presenter any questions that you may have. We will leave time at the end of the presentation to answer questions, and we will also ask throughout the presentation for questions. So without further ado, I will go ahead and give control over to Cristina.
Hi. So our presentation is titled Tips for Reporting Suspected Child Abuse During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And what we're going to do is we're going to give an overview of the difficulties and the stresses around COVID-19. And then we'll have a question period where you can type in questions. And what we'd like to hear are what are you experiencing in teaching remotely? And if anything that's working well for you, please share that as well. So that'll be a brief question period. And then we will have an interview with Children and Family Services talking about the most often asked questions by mandated reporters. And then at the very end, we've scheduled time to do a live question and answer session for all participants. So our first slide, please. So I've listed here the stress and the impact of families on children, and using the protective factors that strengthen families as a template, I'm going to talk about how all of those factors, protective factors, how they're being jeopardized at the moment. So parental resilience, COVID-19 has increased difficult times for parents and caretakers to deal with challenges, especially if that family was challenged already. Social connections, parents, caretakers need friends, family, and neighbors who care about them and their children. Social distancing has limited those support systems. Many social connections are sheltering in place, facing the same challenges as all are during this time. Concrete support in times of need. Asking for help can build resilience. With COVID-19, many concrete support systems are unavailable for parents and caretakers. For example, school support systems like counseling, community resource referrals, and after-school meals. Families may not have access to food, medical services, support groups, etc. The poverty-stricken are particularly hard hit, and some resources are just not available. Knowledge of parenting and child development. Many parenting and child development classes are conducted online with the families in the home. Other sources for that kind of information, family and friends, are sheltering in place and not meeting and talking at gatherings, schools, or other places of social contact. Many at-risk families don't know how to comply with their court-ordered parenting classes, which have been suspended, and are anxious. Social and emotional competence. Through positive interactions with caring adults, children learn how to communicate, develop, and use their thinking skills appropriately. With COVID-19 added stress, those positive interactions may diminish. If a parent or caretaker is experiencing financial difficulties or homelessness, mental health issues, domestic violence, illness, drug use, and food insecurities, these positive communications may not be possible. And also, children are stressed by this, and their behaviors can be challenging on an already stressful family as well. Next. Here we have some statistics from Children and Family Services that Tiffany is going to address.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Miller with Children and Family Services. We, on a regular basis, gather statistics, and with the current situation of COVID-19 and the shelter in place that took place in mid-March, I took a look at our statistics for March 2020 and compared them with a year ago. And typically March is one of our highest call volume months in the year. I also looked at April 2019 and currently April 2020. You can see a significant reduction in calls from last year to this year, and especially during the month of April. You can see that we have had less than half the number of calls. We, of course, are still getting calls from mandated reporters, but primarily what we're noticing is that those calls are coming from law enforcement, primarily, and from hospitals. We do get some calls from community members, family members, and a handful of calls from teachers and counselors. Anecdotally, what we have heard is that the belief is that CPS is closed and that we're not taking reports, which is not true. We are manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The types of calls that we are getting, what we are noticing is that emotional abuse, which is the category under which domestic violence falls, as well as straightforward emotional abuse by a parent, caregiver to a child. We notice that there is a far less reduction in those number of calls that we're getting. And you can see that for physical abuse, I'm sorry, something just popped up on my screen.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah, there we go.
Okay, sorry. For physical abuse, you can see a significant reduction in calls. And then general neglect, while it's half of what we're normally used to receiving, we are still getting, that's still a high category to receive. Sexual abuse calls have remained consistent, which I believe is due to the fact that those calls predominantly come from, again, law enforcement and hospital personnel. So they are still out on the streets, still doing, you know, their jobs and making reports. I don't know if there's any questions related to the statistics, but I'd be willing to give my thoughts.
All right, well, we'll get to that when we get to the Q&A period, I think. So remember your questions. All right, so shelter in place creates barriers to reporting suspected abuse. You cannot see the child in person. You'll see them remotely in a group setting or online in a personal therapeutic setting. The child is unlikely to disclose in an online setting. The child is at home with their family and caretakers and may not be able to speak freely. The child may not be attending your teaching and counseling sessions, and you, the mandated reporters, are under a lot of stress. So all of these are creating barriers. So let's get to now the questions. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask at this point, or can you type in, like, what are you seeing, experiencing? What are some barriers that you see that perhaps has not been touched upon yet? Is there anything that's working well for you?
Just a reminder, everybody can type in their questions in the Q&A box or even in the chat box, whatever you'd like.
I guess everyone's just challenged.
Yeah, we don't have any questions yet.
All right, well, we'll have plenty of opportunity later on as well. We just wanted mandated reporters to feel free to talk about the challenges they're facing.
Oh, we do have a few now.
Okay.
So I know as a teacher, personally, I'm having trouble accessing the child without parents.
Okay.
And then getting kids to connect via phone call is difficult.
Right.
And then someone said, Court-appointed special advocate here. My child went AWOL a month ago and won't come back to the group home. She's engaging in risky behaviors. Yeah, and it looks like a few more said that they're just having trouble actually having telephone visits.
Okay.
Parents not answering the phone.
Well, in regards to the first question or comment about having difficulty accessing the child without the parents present, I would say you're going to want to look for cues or clues in the surrounding background, such as, and I think it's up on your PowerPoint slide, you're looking for, any kind of, does the child look sad or tired? Are there bruises? Are there children being unattended, screaming? How do they look in general? And then you know this child and the history because you've had some time with them over the course of the school year. And if you're ever worried enough, based on your previous experience with them and what you're seeing that day or over the course of a few days, give us a call and have a consultation and or make a report. And then we take the totality of what you're telling us as well as any other maybe previous reports that have been made or concerns by other people, and we'll make an assessment about whether or not we want to send a social worker out to do an investigation, whether it rises to the level per the penal code for an investigation. If you're worried in the moment and it's imminent, we always recommend that you call police to do a health and safety check.
The law requires you make a suspected child abuse report when you have reasonable suspicion a child has been abused physically, sexually, neglectfully, and emotionally. Now, normally we get our child abuse clues by what children disclose, how they behave, how they appear, and what we know about the family dynamic. And for those that work in children's homes, the home environment, is it safe? With shelter in place, this has become increasingly difficult for all of the comments you all made. You can't get a hold of the parents. You can't, the child is unlikely to disclose to you if they're in a classroom setting. I would say we want to acknowledge how hard this is for all of you, especially if the child's not attending class and you can't connect with the parents. But one of the things that I would say to you is follow your instincts, perhaps based on prior knowledge. If you go to bed at night and you're thinking about a child and you can't get them off your mind, I would say you have reasonable suspicion, and you should certainly call Children and Family Services to consult with them and or make a report. It's really just very hard, other than what we say, like if the child appears tired. Let's see, kids, he's doing good.
Cristina, can I address the question
Sure.
from the CASA about the child who's AWOL?
Yes.
I am hopeful, I would expect that you have already notified the social worker of the fact that the child is AWOL. What we can do is we put out a warrant so that when she comes into contact with any law enforcement, they notify us and we're able to pick the child up and bring her back into placement. So I just say, make sure you're in contact with that social worker or the social worker supervisor so that they're aware of the fact that the child's AWOL.
I would also add on this slide that if you have concerns, if you were to see a young child home alone, or you didn't feel that they were safe or they were being taken care of by other younger children, that would definitely be a law enforcement call, and you can call and ask for a health and safety check, and you might have to insist on it, but that is their responsibility, is to do health and safety checks. Because technically leaving a child home alone in the state of California is not considered child abuse unless there's unsafe conditions. The other thing I wanted to, so in terms of these are our signs. We want to go now to the next slide. So just a refresher, if you do have your suspicions, it should be reported immediately and followed up in writing within 36 hours. The form name has changed. It's the old report form, but the number of the form now is BCIA 8852. And a reminder that you would send that report form either by fax or mail to whoever you made the call to. So if you call in a report to Children and Family Services, you would fax or mail it to them. If you call law enforcement, it would go to them. Also, I'd like to ask you to reframe your thinking that you're not getting a family in trouble. You could be helping the child and their family connect to resources they may need that they may not know how to get to. And many interactions that I've experienced from people who've been involved with Children and Family Services, many people are very grateful for that assistance that they receive that they wouldn't have otherwise. So, yeah, go right ahead.
I just wanted to let everyone know, the form is actually BCIA 8572.
8572.
Yeah. So it's the BCIA 8852, and I don't believe is an existing form. I just double checked, but it is BCIA 8572.
Okay. So we will correct that before we send out this PowerPoint to everybody.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So next slide. Thank you, Rebecca. So, and Rebecca has provided the link to get to that form. And also you could always call our office and I can send them to you, or you can go online and get it there. Now, online will allow you to fill the form out, but you can't save it and you can't send it. It's just a way for you to fill it out easily in typing instead of handwriting, but then you would have to print it out and send it via fax or put it in an envelope. Everyone prefers fax because if you fax a report in, you make your phone call. Actually, the tip is fill out the report form, call in your report because you'll have all the information they need from that form, and then fax it in. And then your obligation under the law is complete and you have a time and a date stamp. So faxing is the most preferable way of getting your report in. But yes, the mail still works. Okay. Now, in terms of what you can do, you may try to be available to your clients and students. Be compassionate. See if you can't help the children and the families. See if you can connect visually or auditorily with the students. And many of you have already expressed that that's very difficult right now, that families and children, some of them are missing. But that, and Tiffany, could you weigh in on that? But that alone is not a child abuse report necessarily. It's a school attendance review board issue. So my suggestion to mandated reporters is to follow up through your school protocol what to do when children are absent. Now, that in conjunction with other information may make you feel like you want to make a report. I was worried about the child before, or I made a report on that child before and now they're missing. But just truancy alone is not considered child abuse. So once again, follow your schools, for teachers, follow your school's protocols with the school attendance review board. Try to provide emotional and social supports to students and families as best you can. Maybe you can help kids connect with each other, or you can engage directly with parents if you can find them. Prioritize health and well-being with your students. Adding more stress will worsen child's ability to adapt and learn. So consider the total academic workload you and your fellow teachers and clinicians are asking of students. They are innately stressed out right now. They absorb these things. So you might want to just make sure you're not giving them too much work to do. Try to promote healthy sleeping, eating, and exercise habits, just as as good practice for these children, especially now. Identify children and families who need additional support if you can. Your ability to connect students and families to resources can make all the difference. What do your schools or practices offer in terms of resources? You can always call Contra Costa Crisis Center at 211 or access them online at www.211.org. You can also refer to the Child Abuse Prevention Council Surviving Parenthood Resource Booklet. If you don't have one, you can call our office. Contact information is at the end, and order one or access one on our website. Take care of yourselves. Another thing, what can you do is take care of yourself in whichever way that is personal to you. We must put on our own air masks on an airplane before we can successfully help others put on theirs. So do take care of yourselves. These are challenging times, and I just wish that there was some kind of magic wand and list we could give you to make your lives easier. It really amounts to hypervigilance and sensitivity as best you can. Next slide.
That reporters can always call our screening hotline, where we get updates around resources for families out in the community, be it, therapy services, counseling, food boxes, etc. So you can always call us, and because we also have additional resources or are aware of them.
Okay. Now we get into our interview portion with Children and Family Services. I've been doing mandated reporter trainings for going on 14 years now, and through the years I hear the same questions from mandated reporters over and over. So we've compiled this list, which we hope will help you understand and answer some of those questions. So question number 1. What are the types of questions I should ask a child if I suspect child abuse and neglect, or should they disclose to me? Talk about open-ended questions and close-ended questions.
Okay, my name is Ariel. I work with the Child Abuse Hotline in Contra Costa County. I work under Tiffany. The way I usually see, I usually get a lot of calls from teachers, not being able to ask further questions because they feel like they're somewhat investigating, which yes, we don't want you to investigate, but we also want mandated reporters to check in on the kids and ask certain questions, because the more information we really want it for the worker we're sending out to make sure that family, and that child is safe in that, in their capacity. And so when we talk about open-ended questions, we really want to ask questions such as, I noticed you have a bruise. How did that happen? Some other questions could be like, you seem to get angry when I ask you that question. You can allow the child to respond at their own pace. Can you tell me more about that? How do you feel when this happens? What do they do when this happens? Meaning, like, what is the caregiver, the person that harmed him or hers doing, the current allegations, what do they do? And what do you mean by that? So open-ended questions are very far. If you're asking the child questions like that, you're not investigating, you're just getting the most information you can from the child, without allowing them to say just yes or no. And then I think I'm gonna hand it over to Tiffany on close-ended.
Yeah, I mean, basically what we need in order to go out and do an investigation is the allegations have to meet the penal code definition. Lots of times people think that we can go out on anything, and it has to rise to the level of the penal code related to physical abuse, sexual abuse, general neglect, emotional abuse. And so we need for you to ask clarifying questions if a child makes a brief statement. And in a nutshell, we need to know the who, what, when, where, why. Like the last time it happens, We also like to know whether or not another parent is aware and what they're doing, what kind of protective actions they may be taking or not. You know, so first time, last time, how many times? Those are those closed-in questions once the child has made their initial disclosure and you've done some open-ended questioning. Those little clarifying questions for us so that we know, do we need to go out on this? And is this also a crime reportable to police as well?
Okay, next slide.
Oh.
Okay, so should I report domestic violence as child abuse? So if a child's witness intervenes in or otherwise is aware of an incident occurring between caregivers in the home and or their parents, yes, a report should be made to Children and Family Services. Reasons why it's reportable is because awareness of domestic violence or intimate partner violence can be physically harmful psychologically harmful for a child or children. A child could get physically hurt if caught in the middle of the violence. Domestic violence raises the risk for child abuse. A person who abuses their partner raises the risk of that person abusing their own children. It is definitely important to report or consult on any inklings or information of domestic violence occurring in the home. It's very concerning, and those are reported to PD if not already. So our police department or law enforcement. So I just want to make sure, you know, everyone understands that we take domestic violence very seriously for the psychological health and emotional health, physical health for the child.
Thank you, Ariel. I'm sorry, having some lighting issues. Oh, there, we're back. And I wasn't sure, you did mention the fact that the child has to be either present or otherwise aware of the domestic violence incident, correct?
Let me clarify. Okay. So again, if a child witnesses, intervenes on, or is otherwise aware of the domestic violence occurring in the home, you definitely want to make sure the CFS office to where they live knows that information so we can make an appropriate decision to respond.
Thank you. Okay, why does Children and Family Services follow up on blows to the head and or torso, but other types of abuse, of alleged physical abuse, are not taken so seriously? So that's a little bit misleading. We take allegations of physical abuse seriously. Again, physical abuse is the intentional harming of a child by a caregiver or a parent, or excessive corporal punishment of a child. And anytime a parent causes an injury or is likely to cause an injury, we categorize that as physical abuse or caregiver. Caregiver can also be not just a parent, it could be mom's, mother who's providing care, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a cousin, an aunt, and uncle. So somebody who has regular contact with the child and is providing ongoing care can also be physically abusing a child, could be a physical abuser of a child. We are especially concerned about acts in which a child is hit in the head or in the torso, because the likelihood of a head trauma or internal organ damage is much, much higher. So again, asking clarifying questions. If a child discloses to you that they were hit, we need to know where they were hit, in what manner they were hit. Is it open-handed, closed-handed? Is it with an object? What type of object? I'd say, a bat is much more damaging than a plastic flip-flop. So those clarifying questions are very important in order to understand the lethality or the likelihood of injury to a child. What did I want to say about the physical abuse? I guess in summary, if you're not able to ask clarifying questions, that's fine too. Just, again, call us. We'll take the report and we look at the totality or any of the history with the family.
Tiffany, did you talk about intentional harm?
Yeah, I thought I mentioned that the physical
Perfect.
abuse is intentional harming of a child or the excessive corporal punishment of a child.
Perfect. Okay, so when is suspected emotional abuse reportable? So if we're going to be real, emotional abuse is definitely one of the hardest allegations to prove. But although it's hard to prove, that does not mean it's not reportable. We are a 24-hour hotline. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding a child's emotional health in regards to being in their home, or if their emotional health somehow has adverse emotional behavior with an incident due to a caregiver, we always want to know that domestic violence does fall under emotional abuse. Anytime a child wants to hurt, harm, or injure themselves or others due to caregiver's action or inaction, that raises a cause for concern. I also want to add, anytime a child is being degraded in their home by a caregiver due to how they identify within the LGBTQ community, and child showing signs of symptoms for diagnosis or mental health concerns due to how their caregivers treating them, call to consult and report. Anytime a child stating they're having a hard time to the caregiver, utmost listen to them and see if there is a safety concern. Always call and consult with us. We'll be happy to assist you.
And I'd just like to tag team and say that if you believe a child is at imminent risk in the moment, law enforcement is your first call that you should be making. If a child is expressing suicidality, thoughts of harm, there's not a safe person that they can go to, a parent is unaware that can protect, you're going to want to consult with law enforcement and have them do a health and safety check. What do I do, or who do I call if I'm worried a child is unsafe home alone? So I think Cristina mentioned earlier, there's no set law in California that says at a certain age it's legal to leave a child home alone. It is always based on the child's developmental abilities, as well as whether or not that child has a safety plan in place should something come up. I mean, some examples are obvious. You don't leave a 5-year-old home alone. But having said that, parents who struggle economically may be relying on older siblings to watch younger siblings. And again, that's not against the law, but you need to look at the totality of what is the age and the developmental status of the oldest child who's responsible for the care of the youngest child, and how many children is that older sibling taking care of. And then, like I said, we always prefer that a safety plan be in place. Should, a stranger knock on the door, what is the child being told to do about that? Do they answer the door? Do they not? If if a fire were to start, who do they call? Where do they go to? Are they allowed to cook on the stove or just the microwave? Things like that are the things that we want to know, and that we would hope that you, as teachers and mandated reporters working with children, that you would help that family develop as a safety plan. Because again, having a child home alone is not in and of itself neglect or abuse.
Okay. Can I call Children and Family Services and ask their advice? So legally, CFS cannot tell you whether or not to make a report. You can call them though, or call us or me. You can call us to ask about current circumstances and ask and talk about your concerns. Anytime we get a call and consult, we are always navigating for potential child abuse. All the questions we ask you in regards to your consultation is pertaining to the law that we have to follow, and I will do my best to try and see if there's at all any concerns for the child. I also ask for the child's first name, last name, date of birth. We always want to consider history. So if there's been eyes on this kiddo and there's been multiple reports on certain children, we take history into consideration if it's relevant to what's the concern is. And so usually when you call and ask for our advice, we will navigate, the system with you in regards to maybe there's resources within the community to give the family. But in the end game, it's up to you to decide if you'd like to make a child abuse report. We will guide you in the best way possible. And if not, and if you're still in doubt after consult or asking for advice, just give us the report. We really take reports on everything and anything, and we legally cannot deny a report. And so if there's any cause or concern for a child, we want to know.
I'd like to add too that it's not your responsibility to know who to make the report to. You just need to call one of the agencies, which is either law enforcement or us, and we cross-report to each other if it doesn't meet the mandate for one or the other, so to speak. Sometimes it is strictly a criminal matter, and we will cross-report that. Okay, Cristina, I know you've done some research on this, and I'm going to hand it to you.
So, can a mandated reporter take pictures of children? In the law, it started out that only doctors could, but they've expanded it to all mandated reporters. It's not really advised. If you are going to take a picture of an injury, we know the bruise can change shape by the time someone comes out to look at this bruise. Keep it, if you're going to take a picture, keep it to the short t-shirt zone. And never ask a child to remove their shirt so you can take a picture. You would say, can I take a picture of that? The child would have to agree. Also, if you are going to go down that road to take a picture, make sure that the door is open and that you have a witness. You'd never want this to come back to you. Usually when social workers come to schools, they can take those pictures themselves. So I would refrain from doing this, but know that you legally can in the law. Now, videotaping and audio taping are not in the law. So that is ill-advised. Don't do that. Pictures are one thing, but I don't believe without parent permission you can interview a child and record it. It's because people have asked me, can I video the injury and ask the kid questions at the same time? And that is not in the law. Only taking photos is in the law.
Okay. Does Children and Family Services have to take my report? If you are calling in and saying you'd like to make a report, yes, absolutely. Per Penal Code 11165.9 mandates both CFS and law enforcement to take your report of suspected child abuse. Even with limited information, I saw that Tara asked a question that we can get to in depth later. But even with limited information, if you're third-hand party, you only know a little bit, but it does pertain to suspected child abuse and you have concerns, give us a call, give us the report, or consult with us. Either way, again, if you want to make a report with us, we have to take it.
And law enforcement too, by the way. Law enforcement must take your report by law as well.
Cristina?
Truancy in and of itself is not reportable as child abuse. You need to have other suspicions or concerns. So a lot of the literature right now around COVID-19 is if a child is absent from, you know, your sessions, online sessions. And as I said earlier, that is a school issue, a school district issue. Follow what their truancy procedures are. Can it be a sign for child abuse? Absolutely. Child might be staying home to take care of other siblings, missing school,
hiding a bruise, right? Sometimes children are
Yes.
made to stay home because they
They
have
don't, and
marks or
yeah,
bruises.
yeah, families don't want them to be seen, perhaps, if there's bruising involved.
Mhm.
If you see changes in the child's behavior, while it's a red flag for sure,
Yeah.
You need to have something else to make a report to Children and Family Services about it. Do you have anything else to say, Tiffany, on that?
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, like you had just said, children missing school in and of itself with no other red flags is not reportable, not child abuse. It's a truancy issue, and the schools have their own systems in which to handle that. But if there are other red flags or other concerns, then yes, definitely call us.
Right. And I saw one of the comments that possibly SARBs are currently being suspended. Well, I'm hoping that schools have a plan B for that. So if that's definitely a concern, I would ask your school or agency what their protocol is if child is not attending their online work, and what steps should be taken there if it's not pertaining to, again, child abuse, but just the attendance piece.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I have are the school resource officers still being employed and performing maybe home visits? So I'm unsure whether that's still happening, but if that is a resource, then I would use that.
Yeah.
And School Attendance Review Board officers, they are mandated reporters, and so when they follow up on that the child has been truant, so now they're following up, they're going to see the family and in the home, they would be in the unique position to get more information beyond just the truancy, and they're mandated reporters, and they would be then reporting that.
Thank you. Christina, is third-party knowledge of suspected child abuse and neglect reportable?
Why, it can be.
Okay.
It can be. This is a tricky one. If you receive third-party knowledge, so for example, two therapists or two teachers are talking, and the teacher says, to the other teacher, "This child disclosed sexual abuse to me." The teacher should, because we know for a fact that children don't lie about child abuse. They rarely ever lie about sexual abuse. So that third party now would have suspicion that this child is in danger. And yes, that third party would have to make sure the person who told them made the report. And if they can't verify that, then they have to make the report themselves. Or if the teacher said, "I saw the imprint of a belt buckle on a child today," that third party would have to make sure that the second party made the report, and if not, then make it herself. But for example, if someone said, "I don't like what this child is eating, they're eating bologna sandwiches and a can of Red Bull for lunch every day," do you have reasonable suspicion that that child's being neglected? You may not like the diet, but the child is being fed, and that alone is not considered child abuse unless there's some negative effect to that diet. You can't anticipate the negative effect of a diet. So it depends on what you're hearing. Bottom line is, if what you're hearing gives you in your gut reasonable suspicion abuse has occurred, then it's incumbent upon you to have the other person make the report. And if not, then you make the report yourself.
CFS,
Yeah.
sorry, Christina. CFS actually would love for the person who actually
Yes.
initially heard the information, spoke with the child to make the report. I have seen many, many times in the medical fields where, I mean, I understand medical staff are very busy. They, a lot of the times, hands off the mandated reporting to the medical social worker. We would be asking a lot of questions in pertaining to the medical diagnoses, where we get all the time when we ask, like, oh, what is that? They would just say, oh, I'm not sure. That's what the nurse wrote down, or that's what the doctor wrote down. So I can't go into further detail of that because I'm not sure what that is. I'm just, you know, making the report on behalf of my agency. We really want to hear from the professional, so we can get all of our questions answered, because if there is a medical neglect coming on, that usually could mean that it could be that social workers want to respond as soon as possible, or you know, have all the information. And so a lot of the practices in hospitals that I see is that they hand off their reports to someone who you know, who's not as busy, which is, you know, for your agency that may work, but for our agency, we want to hear from the professional that heard the disclosure, the professional that has seen the injuries, and so on and so forth. So yes, just know that it is your legal obligation to make the report if you hear the information, or make sure your agency makes the information, but CFS does want all the information from the person who heard the disclosure.
Right, I would say, and to one situation that has come to my attention through the years is teachers will tell the school counselor and have them make the report, while the law allows for you to tell the school counselor, who may not be aware of what you're telling them. And then she makes the report, and it's the same situation. She doesn't have access to all of what the child said. And so it's really best that mandated reporters make their own reports and not try to have other people make the report for them, for the very reasons that we've just mentioned. But if someone tells you and you don't believe that they are going to make a report, or you can't say you're going to report that and have the person say, I don't know, and in your gut you're saying, well, this is so reportable, it's still better than no report at all, third-party reporting. But we just want you to know and stress the importance of first-hand party reporting is really critical for children and family services.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. What are the responsibilities of school volunteers or any volunteers working with children? And again, I think Christina's our expert, and so I'm gonna.
Volunteers are not considered mandated reporters. So all those parents hanging around in the front of the office or helping with various things, they, while morally we would like to think that they would report suspected child abuse, they could not be penalized by law for not reporting. There's only one group of volunteers that are required by law to report suspected child abuse, and that would be court-appointed special advocates, and the law changed just for them. Not even volunteer firefighters or volunteer police officers or community citizens are considered mandated reporters. What I've seen in a lot of organizations is that as a condition of volunteering for that organization, they are required to report suspected child abuse. They agree that they will report suspected child abuse. But other than that, there's no penalty for failure to report. And I can think of a couple of organizations like Contra Costa Crisis Center. They have volunteers, but they're mandated by the organization, not by the state, to report suspected child abuse.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about when?
All right, a lot of mandated reporters think that they are mandated to report suspected child abuse all of the time, and that is not correct. You're only required by law to report child abuse when you're working within your professional capacity or volunteering in your professional capacity. So for example, if you are a teacher and on the weekends you volunteer at your place of faith to work with children, you are acting in your professional capacity at that time. You would be considered mandated at that time. But when you come home from work and you go to Safeway and find out there's no more toilet paper, anything you see at that point is then discretionary. It's up to you to make that report. So remember, you can report 24/7. Morally, you should report 24/7. It's just that the state of California cannot penalize you for not reporting on your free time.
Are discretionary reporters protected by law for confidentiality and any civil or?
All the protections afforded to mandated reporters are afforded to discretionary reporters as well. When you're reporting off the clock, you become a discretionary reporter, but all the safety protections for you are in place 24/7, even though you're not required to report 24/7. The non-mandated reporters have privileges too. They just don't get feedback on their report the way a mandated reporter would get feedback.
Thank you. Okay. Our last question, I believe, is if someone over the age of 18 discloses past abuse, should I report it? And if it is only, if the abuser, the alleged abuser for the 18-year-old person does not have contact with any other minor children, we would not take that report because we can't take reports on people over the age of 18. They're not minors anymore. But if you believe that the perpetrator or the 18-year-old believes the perpetrator has access to other children and is concerned that the same type of abuse or abuse will occur to those children or is occurring, then we would take the report based on those children. And then a side note that came to mind when I was looking at this question is we also cannot take child abuse reports on unborn children. So in those circumstances where there is a first-time mom who is pregnant and there's domestic violence occurring, we would not be able to take a child abuse report form. It would be a report for law enforcement because domestic violence is against the law. And then once that child is born, if domestic violence is continuing to occur and the abuser is still having contact with the mom and the child, then we would take a report at that time. Ariel, do you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want to add something?
Nope. I think Tiffany said it very well.
Yeah, me too. I want to just remind everyone that after the webinar, we'll be getting a link with resources, and all of these questions that we have just gone through will have full answers for you. And then we also have some other good information that we'll be sending in a link. So I just want to remind you all that you'll be getting access to all of what we've talked about and a copy of the PowerPoint.
I just looked down at some of the answers and I was reminded that the report for the person who's over the age of 18, as long as there's no other concern for other children, that could be a criminal report that would need to be made. And the report would be made to the law enforcement agency in which the abuse took place, in which the crime took place.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I also, sorry, I guess I want to add now that you reminded me, that if there is let's say a sexual abuse perpetrator lives in a different county. Let's say they live in Alameda County, and you have cause for concerns of an incident of someone living in Contra Costa County that happened 20 years ago, but the sexual abuse perpetrator has access to children. You would want to let Alameda County know, because if the sexual abuse perpetrator is living with, that person has children of their own or living with children, and there's cause for concerns of a suspected known sexual abuser living in a home for a child, you'd want to call the appropriate jurisdiction, which then would be Alameda County, for example, if that perpetrator lives in Alameda County. However, if you do call Contra Costa County, again, you can make the report with us, and we will make sure the report goes to the appropriate jurisdiction at that time. So anytime a sexual abuse perpetrator allegedly lives with children, we want to know. And I guess what if they don't live with children, then we find that out. So we just always, cause for cautionary purposes. We always want to know if there's concerns for other children, even though that person over the age of 18, had that unfortunate experience.
I've got another question for you. Could you talk about, now we're talking about all different types of abuse. Is there any, in terms of calling the appropriate county, with so many children who are divorced and mom lives in Contra Costa and dad may live in Alameda, or the caretakers don't live in the same place, where does the call get called into? I've been asked that a lot by mandated reporters.
So the county in which the parent who has primary custody is the county of jurisdiction. If it is a truly a 50-50 custody incident, it's the county in which the abuse took place. But there's the caveat that it is whatever is in the best interest of the child. So we do have an agreement with our surrounding counties, and we have rules around who takes the report and who investigates it. And there's some negotiating that happens at times. There are times when children may live primarily with mom, but are attending school in dad's county. And so therefore to interview those children, it may be, and considering distance, if the county is quite a ways away, it may be more appropriate for the county in which the children attend school does the investigation. But as a mandated reporter, you don't necessarily need to know that. It's just, good information to have in the back of your mind that it's typically the county in which the children primarily reside.
Mm-hmm. And we'll guide you. If you call us and you're saying, hey, the family lives in Solano County, then we'll be like, oh, okay. So we'll give you two options. Be like, it sounds like this information needs to go to Solano County. I'd be happy to take the information, cross-report to you. Usually it's best to just talk to them because all counties, even though we have the same laws, run differently. And so it's always just best to call the appropriate county yourself, or we'd be happy to take the report and make sure it goes to the appropriate jurisdiction. So yes, when in doubt, always call the county, you work in, usually where you call, but in some cases, if the family lives in Contra Costa County, it's Contra Costa County. So really, you don't have to make that determination. We can tell you. If you're uncertain, you can consult, and we'll always guide you the best way. So.
All right.
All right. Thank you. That was a great question, Cristina. We didn't think of that one.
I know, we're gonna have to add it before we send it out.
Okay, what guidelines does Children and Family Services have to follow before being able to investigate a suspected child abuse report? We follow the penal code for investigations. And the penal code details the specifics around physical abuse, general neglect, severe neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse falls under the willful injuring, willful injuring, intentional willful emotional injuring. I did not know that I was needed to be a lawyer when I joined Children and Family Services. Examples of, here we go. Penal Code 11165.3, the willful harming or injuring of a child or the endangering of the person or health of a child is the emotional abuse under Penal Code. So we follow that in terms of promoting referrals for investigations as well as substantiating the allegations. When we promote a case to the court system, we are following Welfare and Institution Codes 300A through J, I believe is the last one. And so it's two different, two different legal venues But the welfare and institution codes are more detailed, for lack of a better explanation.
My dog. Sorry, guys.
Ariel, do you want to? I hear you.
Happy interruption.
Do
Oh,
you want to
God.
add anything to that?
Just if you guys are interested, you can always look up Welfare and Institution Code 300 A through J. That is what we follow.
In court.
Yeah, that's what
And
the
then-
court follows.
And then penal code 11165.
I actually do want to, I think this is important. Pat asked a question about, oh, it disappeared. So just to clarify, if an incident of sexual abuse occurs, like he gave the example Antioch, but the family lives in San Francisco, the law enforcement agency you want to contact where the sexual abuse incident occurred, which would then be Antioch. I just want to differentiate PD, police departments, law enforcement officers do jurisdiction differently than Children and Family Services. And so wherever the incident takes place is where for law enforcement, wherever the family lives is for Children and Family Services. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Okay, here's a part where we can take any kind of questions or clarification on
Okay,
anything.
so we do actually have a few questions that just came in within the last 10 minutes.
Great.
One of them, my client is 26 and disclosed sexual abuse happened when she was a child, and the alleged perpetrator currently lives with a teenage minor. Is this reportable?
I would say yes. I would err on the side of caution and make that report.
Okay, and then another one, it was asked about 10 minutes ago. Can you clarify protections for mandated reporters and the loss of those protections if they let the family or the community know that they made the report?
Okay. So my thing is that you know your clients and their families the best. So this is kind of a case-by-case question and a case-by-case answer. So in regards to disclosing if you're having to make the report, usually professionals in, let's say, like counselors, psychologists, usually tend to make the disclosure initially that if, you know, that your meeting is confidential unless you disclose, you know, harm to yourself, harm to others, or someone's harming you. And so usually from the bat, people tend to know, or clients tend to know that if they disclose something that's harmful to them, that they become a mandated reporter and you're legally binded to report. Now, to tell them, it depends if, you know, they can, if it's appropriate to tell them. If they're asking for help, you know, that might be like, hey, you know, I can make a report here, you know, to help assist the family and they're open to it. But if it's something concerning, just to rid of any anxiety for the child, I would suggest, you know, not telling the child that you're making a report, because there's a good chance that we may not respond depending on what's being reported. It has to rise to the level of child abuse. And so if a child's expecting CFS to come to the door and we don't come, that's just very anxiety ridden. A lot of the time, children are so innocent, they tell the parents about it, right? They're worried for their family at this point. So it depends on your rapport with the child. It depends on your rapport with the family. If you feel you need to tell them, by all means, you are more than welcome to. We will not, our agency will not be the ones disclosing that information. I'm hoping that answers your question. Tiffany, you want to chime in?
I would like to say something too.
I know you do, Christina. One of the things I want to say is that when we write the report in such a way that your identity as a mandated reporter is confidential. Typically, it'll be a third party, the reporter stated, and we try to, again, have it as anonymous as possible given your role with the child. Now, when we make cross reports to law enforcement, you are to remain confidential, but what we know happens at times with law enforcement agencies is they don't always redact information from their police reports, which are accessible by parents, and your name may be disclosed to the family. Now, I know that there are civil criminal consequences for doing such disclosure, and I know Christina's going to talk about that.
Yes, I am. One of the things that I want to point out is that with therapists and counselors, when they say everything's confidential unless there's a danger to you're a danger to yourself or to others, that's verbally said. I've heard from counselors it helps to have the clients actually sign that piece of paper. There's something about hearing it and signing it that commits it more to memory. If you do, and I've met many therapists who will tell the client, I need to make a child abuse report, suspected child abuse report, they do so in the hopes of maintaining a therapeutic relationship with the parent. So there is no penalty under the law for your disclosing your own name to the family. It is a violation of penal code for anyone else. So like if it were to be a social worker or a police officer says, well, your child's 5th grade teacher or your child's school psychologist, it's up to a $500 fine and up to 6 months in county jail. And ironically, you'd have to file a police report with the police, which makes that a little awkward. But all the protections you have as mandated reporters stay in place whether or not you disclose to the family.
Are there any more questions, Kelly?
We have
Were we thorough enough on that?
We just have one more. It was just a few moments ago. What are the guidelines in being anonymous? Will you tell the parents who reported?
Wait, can you repeat that question?
What are the guidelines in being anonymous? Will you tell the parents who reported?
Okay, so no, we don't tell the parents who reported. And if you are performing as a mandated reporter, you cannot be anonymous.
You must give your name when you're filling out your report. So it is on the report, but it should only be known to the family if it goes to court. And then
No. The reporter, no, it's never disclosed.
Not even in court?
Not even in court.
Okay, good.
I also do want to add that a lot of like family members, neighbors, and people call in being very worried about being anonymous. So they pretty much state they want to be anonymous, which is completely fine. If you are not in your mandated reporting role and you have something you want to report, you actually can remain anonymous. But the downfall is that if the emergency worker is going out on it and needs to maybe ask clarifying questions, they may want to call you. And if we don't know who you are, we can't get any additional information. And so even though mandated reporters, anonymous reporters or neighbors or family members that do call in want to remain anonymous, they sometimes don't understand they are if they give us their name and information. I always do tell them though, if they're wanting to remain anonymous and they're worried about that, they have to think about the information they're giving us. Who else may know that information? You know, people can guess, you know, who made the report because maybe Sally gave Tiffany all the information, right? And so and then Tiffany had to make the report, felt she needed to make the report. So Sally could assume that Tiffany made the report because Sally's the only one that told her. So we always try to let reporters know, like, don't feel you don't want to report because what you're reporting is ultimately in the protection of children. We may want to know who you are regardless. So we have those kinds of conversations with anonymous reporters or people who want to remain anonymous. And I let them know it's actually at the benefit of the child if we know who you are. So if we need to contact you or you could be an ally for the child, you're available to do so. We want to know who is also having good relationships with the children and who also has the child's back in regards to protecting them. So that's kind of what anonymous means, is that anonymous is very anonymous to the parents, caregivers, legal guardians and stuff, but the child probably knows who called because they told you. So just want to let you know, we do not ever disclose. Like, that's Child Welfare 101. Do not disclose who the mandated reporter is or who to call. And
I would like to add to that. Don't be surprised. I've heard this through the years many times where parents are going fishing and they will go to who they suspect made the report and said, social worker told me it was you. And then if the mandated reporter says, well, that's against the law, no one can reveal my identity, you've given yourself away. After you make a report and you don't want to tell the family you've made the report, if you are confronted, try to deflect and say, I can see you're really stressed. Like, can I get you a glass of water? Anything to calm them down, but you do not have to disclose that you were the one that made the report. And bear in mind that they may be just trying to find out.
And you can deny it.
Yeah, this is one time in life. Don't advocate lying, but you can always say, you can say something like, what report?
Yeah.
Try to lie without lying.
Right. That's good. Any other questions, Kelly?
So we have one more. Can you say more about what meets the reasonable suspicion for emotional abuse due to domestic violence? How bad does the argument have to be?
So with domestic violence, I mean, it is common. Anybody who's in a relationship is going to have arguments. So verbal arguments in and of themselves, not emotional abuse. But if there is impact on that child, they're experiencing anxiety, PTSD, suicidality, fear, bedwetting, any of those behaviors, we could potentially make the link that that verbal argument is causing emotional abuse. It's not in and of itself domestic violence. So it's gray, right? Domestic violence is, physicality, in terms of child welfare. It's the physical abuse that children are aware of or are witnessing, which also falls under emotional abuse.
Yeah. Also, I've seen things like that get assigned as like very severe control. And so, like, if the children are witnessing, maybe dad not potentially hitting mom or mom not hitting father, but there's some extreme control to where someone's not allowed to leave the home. There's, control of money, and there's other attributes, and like threatening, even the threatening of hitting, maybe mother or father don't hit one another, but they raise their hand, and there's some type of substantial fear that the children are witnessing. We take all those in consideration when it becomes the child's reaction or the impact on child. And so, like, if there's also like caregivers' actions or behaviors could cause like that emotional harm. We always try to consider, what's best for the child per the penal code and the welfare institutions code. So even if it's not physical, I would say just call and consult and have us make the determination on if it's assignable or not.
Also, domestic violence refers to violence in the home regardless of relationship, and intimate partner violence further delineates the relationship. It's family members who are involved in this domestic violence, but they have an intimate partner relationship with the person that they're abusing. And I think very often people think of domestic violence as women being beaten up by men. And the truth is that more and more men are reporting domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And if it's occurring within the home, no matter what the relationship, it should and there is an effect on the child, or the child is witness to or aware of the aftermath, it should be reported or called for a consult.
Right. Sometimes it's just violence between adults in the home that are not in a relationship, but the children are aware of it. Now, does it fall under emotional abuse or domestic violence category? No, that would be a category of general neglect, the parents failing to protect the child from the impact of witnessing this violence in the home, and perhaps also emotional abuse. But so yes, call us when there's violence in the home. Did we answer that, Kelly?
Yes, and then we just got another one.
Okay.
I have noticed more and more parents who are abusing substances like marijuana. Sometimes it's suspected that they're abusing with their kids. If we suspect that, is this child abuse? Should we report to your agency? It's all suspected, so law enforcement will not investigate without proof.
Right. So no, so if parents are using substances with their minor children, that is considered abuse. It's criminal. The child isn't of age to legally use substances. We would want that report. Now, the piece around consenting legal adults using marijuana is an interesting phenomena that we've had to adapt to. And I always equate it to the use of alcohol and the way that we viewed parental use of alcohol. As long as their use does not impair their ability to meet the needs of the child, they're not driving under the influence, they're not so inebriated or intoxicated or under the influence of marijuana that they couldn't respond to a crisis situation, they're adequately feeding and ensuring adequate clothing for the child, meeting their medical needs. As long as it doesn't impair their parental ability to care for their child, it's not in and of itself abuse.
And if you think about it, cigarette smoking in your home is not against the law.
Yeah.
Drinking wine at the end of the day while you're cooking dinner isn't against the law. And we have had to adjust to this new way of thinking with marijuana. It does, now that it's legal, it falls in those categories.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's the effect on the child is what you're looking for, right, Tiffany? What is the effect on is the parent endangering the child?
Yes.
Like you said, driving under the influence. We know that driving under the influence of marijuana, just like alcohol, is prohibitive, is against the law.
Also, if, like, let's say the parent's not using their substances around the child, but the child's 5 and they leave their pipe or paraphernalia on the table in the access of the child, or they leave drugs out with the access of the a child, that's also raises cause for concern for the living arrangements for the kiddo. So yeah, you can always call again and consult with us in regards to those kinds of questions.
You know, a side note that just came to mind is that sometimes parents will involve their children or bring their children with them when they are engaging in criminal activities. Most often what we hear is petty theft. The mom's got the stroller in the store and, has some of the kids either helping her steal things or not. That is also reportable as child abuse, and obviously it's also a criminal matter. Any other questions, Kelly?
That was it for the questions.
Okay.
Any COVID-19 questions?
Well, I would have a statement that I would like to make is that when we're taking our reports, one of the things that the state of California has asked us to do, as well as our own internal service agency here, is that we are asking the COVID screening questions. And so as mandated reporters, if you too could do your best to find out whether or not anybody has had exposure to somebody who's tested positive, has had a fever, has traveled outside the country, has, and off the top of my head, I'll admit, I don't have them all right on the top of my head, but if you could ask any COVID questions of your families before you make the report, we would appreciate it.
Okay. And then I also wanted to add, I thought I saw a question about will mandated reporters kind of know what the disposition of the report was? I don't know what happened to. I saw it in the Q&A. I would say once, so either if you make a report, CFS sends you a disposition letter. I would say as soon as it's entered in our system, and as well as whenever the investigation's done with the emergency response worker, we cannot tell you the disposition at the end of the phone call. There's a really good reason as to why. One being the disposition can change at any time. We never want to lead our mandated reporters into the wrong direction if we're responding or not. A lot of evaluated out referrals, which means the social worker will not be responding because it doesn't rise to level, are looked at by supervisors and are discussed amongst supervisors. So we really, really thoroughly look through referrals to ensure the safety of the children. But you will receive a disposition letter once it's either entered and or fully investigated. And so I just wanted to answer that question because I always think it's a good question. It's a constant question we always get, what's going to happen. Unfortunately, we can't give you that on our end. But I hope that answers that question. I thought I saw it, but I could be wrong.
Thanks, Ariel.
Oh, I just lost it. There was something I wanted to say. Oh, in my experience, I've heard lots of mandated reporters say they didn't get their disposition, which by law, they're supposed to get their disposition. So I've been telling mandated reporters they should call the same number that they call. They have to give time for an investigation, but that they should call the same number they called to report and leave a message with screening that they have not received their report, and that you guys will then get it to the appropriate social worker handling the case, and then that person will contact them. Is that still good advice?
Yeah, yes, that is great advice. We can't confirm or deny because we can't confirm or deny the person's identity as being the mandated reporter. But we will, if there's an investigation, we will relay the information to the assigned social worker.
Okay. Let's see. These are some good questions. Can you say more about what meets reasonable suspicion for emotional abuse due to domestic violence? How bad does the argument have to be? Did we answer that one, or this looks like a new one?
I went into it a little bit, but I didn't talk about the reasonable suspicion piece. I don't know if you want to jump in on that, Cristina.
Emotional abuse is so tricky.
But the reasonable suspicion part, I think.
The reasonable suspicion, I would say when you see a change in the child's behavior as a result of the emotional abuse. Some children are very resilient and their parent can yell and curse at them and it's like water off a duck's back, and other children crumble. So, you know, the best thing you can do calling in emotional abuse is to be able to address how the emotional abuse has affected the child's behavior.
Beautiful.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
I think we did say a little bit about that earlier, about the impact. It's about the impact on the child. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in general, what you guys are always looking for is what is the intention of the parent?
Yes.
And what is the effect on the child? Like basically you're looking at that.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually see a really good question. If a mother states she's going through depression and she denies counseling services to her child, is that reportable? I think the first thing I would want to know is what the impact to the child would be. So is mom's depression, you know, not and how old the child is. So the vulnerability of the child and how it's impacting the child. For example, if mother's depressed and she has a 4-year-old and the 4-year-old's not eating, I would definitely say, you know, that causes concern because the 4-year-old doesn't have access to food or water.
Her ability to meet the needs of her child.
Right. Pretty much if she's meeting the needs of her child and has depression, there may not be cause for concern of child abuse, but you can also call in and consult with those questions, because we'll ask you more questions in regards to things to see, you know, how mom's depression could be relatable to the impact of the child. So always just call and consult.
And there are respite resources for people in those situations too. That could be a great stay out of the system resource. Mom has mental illness and no effect on the child right yet, like maybe Bay Area Crisis Nursery would be a good option for that person to get the help that they need.
Right. Or that could even be seen as a strength if mom has depression and is taking care of her own and taking care of her kids. You know, I would ask mom, you know, what do you think could help you in this time? Like, who are your friends, who are your families, who are your support system to assist you if you ever feel like you're not able to, you know, drive your child to school or do something, who can you call that can assist you? And so it's almost like all of our professions, we somewhat always have a social work aspect to it. And so you actually have the capability and have the opportunity to be able to help the family without CFS intervention in regards to using community resources. You know, that's why they're funded. That's what they're there for. And it's a really good tool to use because that's really what CFS would be doing. We may be enforcing it a little bit more through the court system, but CFS ultimately just makes sure there are connected to community resources to be successful parents and caregivers. And so, yeah, that's what I want to say on that.
I think Heather has a good question here, and I don't know how to answer this. Are resource families getting any support or training about COVID-19 and how to protect children placed in their care?
They are getting, they have resources, there's trainings. We are taking care of them in terms of providing them with what they need.
Okay.
All right. Well, as we're, any other questions? All right. As we're wrapping up and the time is getting nigh, on behalf of the presenters, we would like to thank you for the work that you do that ensures children's safety, and always, and especially during this time. We'd like to remind you that this session was recorded, so if you had to leave early or if you think it would be beneficial to any of your coworkers who couldn't make it, we'll be able to provide that for you. And then also we are going to, again, send all the participants a link to all of the resources where these questions that we asked have been filled in with specific answers. We have all sorts of good information, tip sheets to be had. And I really value Tiffany and Ariel. We have a great relationship, the Child Abuse Prevention Council and Children and Family Services. And I called them and we put this together, and I think I thank you for your cooperation.
You're more than
always.
Welcome. Yeah, you're more than welcome, Cristina. We love partnering with you. You do a great job with training, and thank you, Ariel. You were most valuable in this session. I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Oh, and one last thank you is to Kelly.
Yeah.
Kelly, yes, who has been, if it weren't for Kelly, I know I couldn't have done this.
And thank you to Cristina, Tiffany, and Ariel for your expertise. I don't know if you can see, but we're getting a whole bunch of thank you messages coming in. So yeah, sweet. Lots of positive feedback. And like it was mentioned, we'll have a PowerPoint, a recording of the presentation available, all the questions and answers. So thank you, everyone, especially Cristina, Tiffany, and Ariel.
Thank you. And
I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Yep. Be safe. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Love those kids out there.
Thank you.